Welcome, everybody. This is our RAM Group webinar on Ecomaps, and I'm joined today with Tanya Boavida, who is in Lisbon, Portugal, and others may be joining us as we go along. The topic of today's webinar is Ecomaps. This is one of the components of the routines-based model. And very often it's the first one that people start with because it's really the first thing in the process of getting to know a family as they enter early intervention. I'm going to show you a few slides first. Let's see, screen share. Let's find the right place here. Here we go. Okay. When we talk about Ecomaps, here you see one that we often use in training just because it's nice and simple. And Tanya, can you see this one okay?
No.
You cannot see it? Okay, hold on. Let me go to screen share again. Share the screen. Let's try this. How about now?
Yeah, now it's good.
Now is good. Okay. Here is a very simple eco map. It's not really very realistic. It's usually hand drawn for a start and has more elements to it. But it shows the basic structure of an eco map with the family that the child lives with in the middle box, and the informal supports across the top, formal supports across the bottom, intermediate supports on the sides. So here we see a simple little intact family, Kevin and Sarah with their daughter Michelle. And you can see that Sarah's parents are the maternal grandparents. And this is a thick line here. So this is another element to the Ecomap, is the thickness of the lines. And this is determined by asking just one or two questions of the person that you're talking to, which is obviously usually a parent. And with the informal supports, what we often do is ask how often you have contact with these people, how often you see them, how often you talk to them, or whatever. That is a bit of a proxy for the amount of support that a person gives, on the assumption that the more frequent you talk to somebody, the more support that person is to you, or you wouldn't talk to them that often. For the formal supports, the question is usually how much you like the person. We don't ask parents how good the professional is, because that's a hard judgment for parents to make about the quality of a person's professional practice. But they certainly can tell how much they like a person. And when it comes to support, that often is how families judge the people who provide professional support. It's really maybe two things. It's, do they do what you wanted them to do, and do you like them? And if they do what you want them to do, often that does get parents to like the professional. So this is the basic structure then. And so you see grandparents on the top, you see aunts and uncles, extended family in other words, brothers and sisters of the parents. In the formal supports, you see almost always we should ask about healthcare providers, because obviously in most cultures, children do have a healthcare provider, like a pediatrician. It might be a health department. If they're already identified as having a disability, they might already have professionals in early intervention. If it's the first time that we're meeting the family and they're new to early intervention, they might not have yet any early intervention professionals. For informal supports, we often ask about, in the United States, we ask about spiritual life or religious life, because this is a very religious country and many families do get a lot of support from their churches. And we in almost all cultures also ask about work. For each adult in the home, we ask whether they work outside the home and whether that work brings in a decent income and whether they like it. Also, we ask whether the people at work know about the family situation and know about the child and so forth. We ask those questions to judge the thickness of the lines. So here you see that work colleagues is how it's mentioned in this Ecomap, with just straight lines, just thin lines, meaning they're there, but don't provide a lot of support. We usually now just use the word work so that we can include income as part of the support, which is actually quite controversial in the United States. We think we will be having people attending this webinar from many parts of the world: Portugal, Spain, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, and of course the United States. And so here we have an Ecomap that I think was done by Pau Garcia Grau, which shows the relationships in Spanish, and you can see the different thicknesses of lines here. This is an Ecomap that I often use in training to show how an Ecomap can actually show things that go wrong in early intervention. Here we have Stephen and Krista, the parents, with their daughter Darcy. And this family identified many, many professionals that are in the town where they now live, which is in blue here. And a few informal supports, most of whom are out of town. On this Ecomap, I just made it with the out of town people in the white boxes. And Krista, the mother, said, if you look at the top here, that Krista has, the mother has little time for friends and doesn't know what to do with her afternoons, which she claims is the worst time of the day. She said that the worst time of her day, a question that we often ask in the RBI, the routines-based interview, the worst time of her day was when she was alone with her child in the afternoon, a time that you might think was a great time for many parents when they could just enjoy their child. But she couldn't really enjoy her child, Darcy, because she didn't know how to play with her. Now, Darcy only had global mild delays, but she had all these services. And yet, even with all these services, she could not, Krista, the mother, did not know what she could do, how to play with her child. And this is a phenomenon we sometimes see in early intervention, which is that the professionals are so focused on therapy and non-functional goals that they miss the most obvious things, which is things like playing with the parent during playtime or hanging out time. Also, you might wonder, why didn't Krista have more informal supports? Well, she was so busy taking her child to all these services that she really had no time to develop her informal supports. So it's interesting what the Ecomap can sometimes reveal. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute. Okay, just to talk a little bit to you about the process of the Ecomap, because it's really the process that is just as important as the product. The Ecomap only takes about 15 minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and it's a time to begin establishing a relationship with the family. And the spirit of the Ecomap should be conversational, friendly with the family, and the way we do it in the routines-based model is that the professional is drawing the Ecomap while talking to the parent, but drawing it so that the parent can see what it is that you're drawing. Let me show you a little bit more about a few more slides on the about the Ecomap. Let's go back to this. Okay, some people like to have what you might call a template. That is, they will provide for the early interventionist something that they sort of fill in. In this program, they drew a circle for the family, and then the early interventionist has to write in these other things and draw the different thicknesses of the lines. I think that's okay, although personally I prefer to construct the Ecomap from a blank piece of paper. It feels more like I'm doing it in an individualized way with that family, and it's their map. But I do recognize that sometimes we, if we provide a form of some kind, that can serve as a reminder to professionals to do something. So I understand the value of that also. What you should not do, however, is draw an Ecomap with the middle square or circle and then put boxes on the outside, because that looks like it's predetermining the number of supports that a family might have. And in my experience, sometimes we have a lot of boxes and sometimes we have very few boxes on the outside. So it's better to keep the outside part free to be developed with the individual family. Now, I've mentioned the routines-based model a few times. The Ecomap is one of 17 components of the routines-based model. We really join the Ecomap with the routines-based interview. In fact, we train people, when we're training people on the routines-based interview, we also train them on the Ecomap to do as at the beginning of the RBI. It actually can be done on a prior visit, but if it hasn't been done on a prior visit, it should be done at the beginning of the RBI. And then part of that training also is on participation-based child goals and writing family goals. So these 1, 2, 3, 4 components of the routines-based model are all about intervention plan development, and they're a very important part of the routines-based model. This is what an Ecomap actually looks like in real life quite often. It's hand-drawn. The fat lines are parallel lines, like many of these are here. Here you see some moderate lines. There you see thin lines, and there you see the dotted lines, and the dotted lines are for sources of stress. I do want to point out that there are various pieces of evidence for the really critical part of doing the Ecomap, which is the identification of informal supports. So Jim Garbarino in 1983 reported on work by Castle showing that lab animals exposed to shock do not show symptoms of stress when they are with members of their own species, but they do when exposed alone. Nadler and Rock showed that gorillas develop patterns of child abuse and neglect when left to rear their babies in isolation, but do not do so when they remain in the company of their group. So there's something about being with other people in our case. Studies of both lower animals and humans show higher rates of illness and death among those who have experienced disruptions of social relationships. And inmates in concentration camps coped better when they had a family member or at least someone perceived as a fellow than when they did not have those people. So all of this is about the importance of social support in families' lives. French in 1973 found that blood samples from workers at stressful work sites showed fewer biochemical indications of stress when the workplace was an interpersonally supportive setting. Knuckles et al. Showed that women with medically at-risk pregnancies suffer only a third the complications at birth if they are well connected socially with more friends and relatives in frequent contact. You see that a lot of these studies are actually quite old. It's a bit of a shame that the research on social support seemed to wane in the 1980s, because it's not like social support has become less important. If anything, it's become more important. Here's some more recent research. Russ et al. Found that networks change over the lifespan, with size and strength being more or less important at critical times. And we know this is true in families with young children with disabilities, that the mere fact of having a child sometimes changes your network, and if the child has a disability, that might also change it. A review of the autism literature revealed association between challenging child characteristics and mothers' inclination to seek social support, with mothers who are under more stress being more prone to pursue social support. For mothers with children with autism, informal support was a more effective buffer against stress than was formal support. And yet we often try to give families more services, and yet in fact what we need to be doing is fostering their informal supports. Parents with support related better to their children than the parents who did not have support. This is all Boyd, this is Brian Boyd's research. And low levels of support were the most powerful predictors of depression and anxiety in mothers. Okay. So I have briefly described what Ecomaps are. They usually happen before the RBI, the routine-based interview, and I've emphasized that the most important part about the Ecomap might be the identification of informal supports, so that then we can use those as part of our way of helping families once we're providing services to them. Okay. Tanya, this is Tanya Boavida from Portugal. Tanya, what has been your experience with Ecomaps? Do they work okay in Portugal?
Yes, they do. So in Portugal, a lot of people are using them. and they allow us to. So what professionals tell us is at the beginning they give you a good perspective of the family support, mainly informal support. And they also allow us to see how many people are around this child, so we can better work with them. So it's a very powerful tool to start working with the families.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for people when they first start trying to do Ecomaps?
Well, first, how to ask the questions without asking about support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Challenge, because people tend to ask, do you feel support from whom? Or so it's hard to start asking about supports without saying it.
Okay, let me address that a little bit. Tanya is talking about an important technique when we do the Ecomap, that even though we're trying to get at supports, it's actually not a good idea to ask families, who do you get support from? Who are your biggest supports? Once you start using those words, that seems to put people, the supports that people have, into this category that limits people's answers, parents' answers. So one of our rules is don't use the word support when you're asking about supports, which of course is very confusing and difficult for people. So Tanya, in Portuguese, support is probably some word like apoio or something, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and of course in English the word is support, and so we ask about relatives, how often you see them. We ask about friends. We ask about neighbors. We ask about where you go to church, about your work. We ask about what services you get. All of those questions, you see, avoided the word support. So it can be a bit of a challenge for people to ask the questions, to get the thickness of lines first, but also to ask who is in your network without using the word support. Tanya, when you've done a lot of training on the routines-based interview, did you include Ecomap as part of that training?
Yes.
Yeah. That's very common now, and in Portugal, do people do the do they tend to do the Ecomap with the RBI or at an earlier visit?
In an earlier visitor.
Ah, yeah.
In the first contact. Or
the first contact, which might be from. Is it usually the same person who does the RBI though?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
It depends of the service, but I think so. So the first contact, normally it goes 1 or 2 person from the team. And they don't do the RBI at the first contact. They try to know the family, to work about the expectations, and I think they do the Ecomap at that point.
That's very similar to what happens in the United States, and so you have to remember that if a different person does the Ecomap from the RBI, then with the parent's permission, you should make sure that the RBI person gets the Ecomap before they start the interview. Good. Tanya, is there anything else that you think people should know about the Ecomap before we end this webinar?
I don't know. About Team Ecomap? Should I say something?
Oh, okay. Yes, why don't you talk about that?
Because there's a team in Barreiro that have done a Team Ecomap. So they try to get, it's working well with the families, so they thought it will work also good with the team, and it will be a good tool to help then the families supported by the team. So they try to get all the support they have, formal and informal, in the community of Barreiro. So this was done in a supervision with Professor Pimentel.
Very good. So Tanya's describing where the unit, the equivalent of the family, is an early intervention team. And they met to figure out who were their various supports, which are supports to them, and also many of them can be supports to the families that they work with. This is a beautiful example of taking a tool that was developed for work with families and expanding it in exactly the way Yuri Bronfenbrenner, many of you will know about the famous Russian psychologist who really described well the ecological way of thinking about systems, and they've applied in Barreiro this technique for figuring out the supports for a team. Very good. Okay, you can find out more information about the Ecomap at www.ramgroup.info. And if you go to that website, you'll see a number of materials which we're still building upon, but we have materials there on the Ecomap. So thank you for joining us in this webinar, and we'll have more webinars to come. This webinar is, you might be watching it right now on YouTube because it will be recorded and live forever on YouTube. Okay, thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.